Hey there, you funky cats. Thanks for joining me today. I am going to show you how to set up a turntable to an old school amplifier using speakers, speaker wires, the whole works. So I know it's quite popular now to have a turntable and to buy some of that precious vinyl. The sweet sound of a vinyl. You gotta dig it. And now it's getting popular. I think it's good to show you some tips on how to set it up and how to get a sweet sound. So the first thing you need when you're doing a setup, you need an amplifier. The amplifier powers the signal from the turntable, and then it actually powers the signal to run these speakers. Today, we're running a Wharfdale speaker. They're 100 watts either side, and this is a beautiful 7300 Pioneer solid state. You got to love those old school solid state amplifiers. They are reliable as all get out. I love this Pioneer. It's a ripper. And what's going to run the vinyl today is this beautiful Garrard. It's a turntable that was built and made in the 60s in the UK, and they are still running beautifully. This is a serious piece of equipment, my friends. And when you first buy it, you get the actual turntable, so this the lighter part of the turntable, and then you put it onto a plinth, which is this darker part of the turntable down below. Within this plinth, I actually have some sand in there. This whole setup, the turntable, weighs just over 20 kilo. So we reduce the hum. I'll get into the hum later. Don't worry about that. So that's what you need basically to get a turntable to work. You need a turntable. Stylus is pretty important too, I may add. But you also need your amplifier and your speakers. So you've got right and left speakers. I'll get into that a little bit later as well. But that's basically all you need. Outside of that, you need some sparks. Yep, you guessed it, electricity. What a phenomena that is electricity, isn't it? But that's what runs this whole business, electricity. And so we'll need that to go. So what we need to do, the first thing is we need to hook up the speakers to the amplifier. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to spin this amplifier around, and Sash, if you wouldn't mind coming in with that, and we can just show what's going on in the back end of this amplifier here. So here are my speaker cables, or speaker wires, some people call them. So what they're essentially doing, this amplifier can run two sets of speakers. So a speaker A and a speaker B. Okay, I'm just running the speaker A's today, and they're going in my right and left side. Okay, and you can notice on any speaker wires or speaker leads, there is a line on it or words on it, so you just keep the blacks and the reds going to the back of the speakers. I'll show you on the back of the speakers where we've got blacks and reds. Blacks and reds on the amp. So you keep them consistent. And so on all speaker wires, you will have some indication on one of the wires on these really cool leads, nice and thick. They've got words. So I run them to the black. So there's words that go right down the lead, and so you keep the blacks consistent and the reds consistent when you're putting your leads. And generally it's black and red, yeah? I don't want to go into why it's about, because that's a different lecture altogether. There's no point starting that lecture, is there? That could be a later time. But essentially, if you're running black to black, red to red, no issues. Okay, it still works. If you don't do the black to black and the red to red, it still works. But I don't think the sound's as good, and it can create a hum. And let's face it, when you're listening to music, there's not much worse than hearing a hum. The hum is not on. Anyway, so this is the speaker business here. and that's going to the speakers. I've got my speakers going in and out. So this is all stuff coming out of the amp, okay? When you've got stuff coming out of the amp, it's going into a speaker. So it's sound coming out and into the speakers. Now, on this side, we have what's going into the amp. So the sounds that are going into the amp. So as you can see here, we've got the phono, which is another word for a record player. We've got the tuner, which is another word for a radio, not a fish, a radio. And then we've got auxiliary. Auxiliary can be anything like a CD player, a phone, where you use this lead here, which is, and I'll go into it a bit later, which is an RCA lead, white and red, RCA, to a 3.5 jack, or as some of the cool cats out there today call it, a headphone jack. I run with the 3.5. Okay, so the 3.5, that goes into the phone or an iPod or whatever, and this goes into the auxiliary, and that will have sound coming into the amplifier and then out of the speaker area, and it will create sound. So all of this area here is what's going into the amplifier, and the amplifier gives it a boost and then sends it out these wires to the speakers. So the amplifier runs the speakers and boosts the signal here. Okay, so essentially at the back of an amplifier, you've got ins and you've got outs. So you don't want to put speakers going in to your amplifier. It's never going to work. Okay, the speakers are the sounds coming out, and these ones here are the sound that is going into the amplifier. Really important thing. Even if you're stuck on a PA system, it's a really good rule of thumb. What's going in is the sound going in, like a microphone, and what's coming out is generally your speakers. Okay, it's a very good rule of thumb. Right, let's get into putting this beautiful Garrard into our 7300 Pioneer amplifier. Okay, now we're going to set up the turntable. At the end of the day, all turntables work the same way, pretty much. Some turntables have an inbuilt preamp. Okay, they're the new Fandangle ones. This one doesn't have a preamp. So you sometimes need to buy a preamp before you go in, but these old solid stators, they have a phono input, so no preamp required. Okay, with these ones, even if your turntable does have a preamp, you can still go straight into the phono input. You just won't need to turn so much juice on. Or if you're finding that does hum, or it's putting too much signal into your amplifier, just go into the auxiliary. Okay, you could try that as another way of hooking up your turntable if it is fitted with a preamp. Okay, the old school turntables don't have a preamp, but in these old school turntables, they have a phono input which has a booster, if you were, behind it that boosts the signal, so no preamp required. Okay, so if we then get from our turntable, just like the RCA leads, we've got a RCA lead here, which is at the end, and then this ground. Okay, you need this ground. Some of the new turntables don't have a ground, but what it does essentially, rather than going into impedance and all, it all goes into impedance and that sort of business, and reducing the electrical current running down your RCAs. We won't go there, but for the most part, it stops humming. Okay, I said I would go back to the humming, and that's what it does. If you find that your turntable is humming or whatever, it probably means that your ground isn't grounded properly. Okay, so what we do is we take our RCA leads and we whack them in. I go right for red, white for left. Okay, I just plug them in there, and then I get my ground here, and there it is at the back of these old solid state amps. we can just whack it in there and we get that in there like so. Beautiful. She's beautiful. There we go. So we've got our RCA going into our phono, not our tuner or our auxiliary, because this is what will boost the signal. And then I've grounded my turntable there. Okay. Quite often with these old school amps, you'll find that you can ground on the machine. Okay. It will have, if it's got a phono input, it will have a ground. Okay. No doubt. So that's the back of it. If we then turn around to the front of the machine, very simple. We've only got a few knobs here. So here we've got the selector of what's going into. Remember I was talking about in and out? This function selector is basically choosing what's going into the amp. Okay, so we've got phono, tuner, and auxiliary. But we know we are putting a phono together. I've just plugged the phono in, so we select phono there. Volume, basically how loud you want to play your music. And then here, if we move across, we've got treble. That will increase your highs, and the bass will increase your lows, basically. And then your balance basically tells us whether you want to have all your sound coming out of your left speaker or all your sound coming out of your right speaker. Okay, we generally keep it in the middle, so both speakers are coming out with the same sound. And then over here, we have speakers. As you know, I plugged the speakers into speaker A, but there's speaker B, and you can run both speakers at the same time if you've got 4 speakers. So you can run A and B at the same time, just B if you've got them in another room, or just A, or you can have them off altogether. Sometimes that can trip you up because if you've got it in the off position and you forget about it, you think, why is there no sound? What's going on? You haven't got your speakers selected, or your monitors, whatever you want to call them, you just haven't got it selected. So make sure, go through that. If there's no sound, it just means that your speakers might be off. And then there's the tape options, which we don't need to worry about at this point because that's going back into another thing of taping reel-to-reel or old school audio tapes. Okay, so that's the front of the machine. And I'll take you through that when we've got some sound running. So we've got our speakers, our amp, our turntable, and that we've plugged them in. We've got our leads going from our speakers into the back of the amplifier, both speakers, right speaker and left speaker. Whenever you think about right and left speaker, it's when you're facing your equipment, the speaker on the right is the right speaker, and the speaker on the left is the left speaker. Strange how that works, but it works. Okay, so here we go. We've got everything done. Now we're going to give it a go and see how we go. So the first thing you need to do is make sure we're plugged in. You need to plug your turntable in and your amplifier into power, and we turn it on now, and we've got power there. And the next thing you need to do is check that you have got some power here. So you flicker on and we're turning. And over here, a really important thing to know is we have a few settings for the record. So we've got 33, which is your 33 there, and your 45s, which is your small ones, and your 78s. Okay, so we're using 33, and most of the records that we play these days are 33. And so if it comes out too fast or whatever, you'll know that your speeds you have an issue with your speed. So your speed is wrong. But that's all right. So we're right there. We've got it on phono. We've checked all our things. And then what we do is we take our arm across. I like to first put the volume down, just so there's no issues. You put your arm across, you line it up, and then you drop your tone arm. This is called a tone arm. And then you turn her up. And this is Beatles Magical Mystery Tour. We're all on a magical mystery tour, aren't we? And the reason I've chosen this, because this was the first album I ever owned. The Magical Mystery Tour by the Beatles. But it was on cassette tape. And I used to listen to it almost every night. So I know this album pretty well. So when you've got it there, and you are playing around and you just want to check out your tone, you can put your tone up and down or your bass up and down, depending on what you like to listen to and how you listen to music, and then that's when you can do it. It's a very small, it's called EQing, a very small EQ, I'm aware of that. But you can just play around with your treble and your bass and get it to an area where you like it. But essentially, that is a setup for playing records.